Welcome back to The Stream. Here on The Stream, we understand how important it is to acknowledge and support victims and survivors of domestic violence.
Yeah, in the city of Chicago itself, between 2017 and 2020, domestic violence cases were 13 times more common than sexual assault in Chicago, and that was according to a study by the Chicago Justice Project. So joining us now to shed more awareness on the topic is The Stream's Jamaica Ponder. And Jamaica, you've been working on a story about this, helping to just really bring this story to life and share the experiences.
Absolutely. And if there's one thing that became very clear from my reporting is that domestic violence is also a financial issue. And that's really at the root of the story that we'll see today. And the topic is so important because most people will be impacted by domestic violence sometime in their life, whether directly or through friends and family. And despite its prevalence, it doesn't seem to come up often enough in the conversation. And the less we talk about it, the more difficult it is for people to know what support systems exist. So I sat down with one woman who found herself in that exact spot, and she took me through her unique journey of getting back on her feet.
Over here we can just kind of, the highest was 44 packages in one day.
As of late, Kaitlyn Brown has spent a lot of time dealing with boxes.
My Amazon drivers, they're like thinking I'm crazy, and I'm trying to explain the situation. It's not me, it's TikTok.
This here is just a fraction of the dozens of boxes sent to Brown from complete strangers across the internet.
I have a half of a storage unit full of just Amazon packages.
The gifts began pouring in after Brown posted a video of her destroyed apartment, a result of a domestic dispute that left her and her 3-year-old son with hardly any salvageable belongings.
All of my clothes are ripped and just gone, everything.
You look at just the destruction, it's just absolute kind of defeat.
She placed a call to police, and while no arrests were made, she was able to get an emergency order of protection within 24 hours.
I mean, it's just a piece of paper to most people's eyes, but I met with the judge that same day. I was in the courtroom for about 15 minutes.
Then she returned home to an unlivable apartment.
Like, we can't afford to replace all this. We can't afford to rebuild the last 3 years of her life. And how do you explain that to a 3-year-old?
The video went viral pretty quickly, garnering over 4 million views in just a few days.
Once the comments started rolling in on TikTok, the GoFundMe questions were asked, and pretty soon one turned into two, turned into thousands of people asking, what's the GoFundMe?
Unsure of how else to afford to restart and restock her life, Brown took her commenters' advice, creating both an Amazon wish list and a GoFundMe.
And it was just to raise a few grand.
She passed a few grand in several hours and broke 10 grand in 3 days. Before the end of the week, folks had donated over $30,000.
I have more than enough to rebuild and start over.
Brown ended up shutting down her donation platforms shortly after opening them, as she and her son use what they've been gifted to get back on their feet. But Brown's story is an outlier in a pervasive culture of gender-based violence, where 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will experience it at some point in their lives.
So that means close to 1 million people, at least, in the city of Chicago are going to experience gender-based violence at some point. We have, by contrast, 185 shelter beds.
Amanda Pyron is the executive director of The Network, a group of over 40 organizations working to support those impacted by domestic violence.
We're trying to build up an infrastructure where survivors can heal themselves, replace what they've lost, get on with their lives.
While Pyron admires survivors like Kaitlyn, she doesn't think people should have to post their trauma online to get the aid and services they need.
GoFundMes are great, but they're not government. They're not a safety net. They're not predictable. And you can't leave individual safety up to the chance of social media. In actual fact, these are things we should be using our tax dollars for.
The network is funded by tax dollars, 5 million of them through the city's budget. That, along with corporate money, goes to financing their survivor fund.
Unfortunately, we can't provide $30,000 of support to each survivor, but we do have $1,000 cash grants through the city of Chicago. We're able to make larger grants through private funds as we have them to survivors across Illinois.
Pyron says it's not enough, and their survivor fund applications are presently closed due to a lack of funding.
It's very under-resourced in the city in terms of emergency crisis services and emergency crisis housing.
Despite the deficit, the network still manages to grant hundreds of thousands of dollars directly to survivors.
Almost every person in the country, in the city, in the state will experience domestic violence, either firsthand or through a friend or a family member. And so we want to make sure that wherever you are and whoever you are, you have services and help and support that make sense to you.
Amanda says the network is currently working to get more funding through City Hall to sustain services and the Survivor Fund through next year. And in the meantime, we're seeing the continued use of GoFundMe in the place of public services, especially when it comes to health care and housing.
Jamaica, thank you for sharing that. You know, I know it's so vulnerable for someone like the one we heard from in your story to post about it and to share about it. I couldn't imagine putting it out there, but I know her hope was to shed light and also to help others too.
Yeah, and I know, I'm talking to so many survivors myself. I mean, the financial aspects of it often keeps them in that prison of a relationship, that prison of a house, or however we're going to put it.
Because they just have no choice and nowhere to go.
Absolutely. Jamaica, important story.
Thank you.
Thank you.